May 11th, 1982. Boston Harbor. A man sits in a parked car, eyes fixed on a waterfront restaurant. A walkie-talkie rests in his hand. Inside, two men finish their dinner. One made a deadly mistake. He spoke to the FBI about a murder. The other is just giving his coworker a ride home. A father of three, completely innocent. The man behind the wheel wears a wig and fake mustache. His name is James Whitey Bulger, South Boston's most feared gangster. A voice crackles through the device. The balloon is in the air. Bulger puts the car in drive. What follows would remain hidden for decades. Because this killer had something extraordinary. Protection from the FBI itself. This is the story of the FBI's most evil operation. A partnership with a monster that left bodies buried and truth hidden for decades. It all began with two boys from the same neighborhood. South Boston was a fortress. Irish Catholic families lived shoulder to shoulder in narrow streets lined with brick row houses. Neighbors shared everything: meals, secrets, and an unspoken code. Loyalty came before all else. In this neighborhood, two boys were growing up just blocks apart. Their futures would become intertwined in ways that would shake the entire nation. The first boy was James Bulger. Everyone called him Whitey because of his bright blonde hair. By the time he turned 14, Whitey had already earned a reputation. While other kids played baseball in empty lots, he was running with street gangs. Petty theft became armed robbery. Teachers saw trouble. Neighbors saw something darker. But in South Boston, Whitey played a different role. He positioned himself as a protector. He handed out ice cream to local kids on hot summer days. When bullies picked on younger boys, Whitey stepped in with his fists. He had a code: protect your own, punish outsiders. The second boy was John Connolly, 6 years younger than Whitey. To young John, Bulger was a legend. He heard the stories. He saw how people respected him. One afternoon, a group of older kids cornered John, ready to beat him up. Out of nowhere, Whitey appeared. He scattered the bullies without hesitation. John Connolly carried that moment with him for the rest of his life. A debt, a bond, an admiration that would eventually destroy everything he stood for. The 1960s pulled these two boys in opposite directions. Whitey's crimes caught up with him. Armed robbery convictions sent him to Alcatraz, the infamous island prison in San Francisco Bay. For nearly a decade, he lived among America's most hardened criminals. He learned their methods. He studied how organized crime families operated. Prison became his university. Meanwhile, John Connolly chose a different path. He attended college, worked hard, and in 1968, he graduated from the FBI Academy. He became a federal agent, a symbol of justice and law. After serving in field offices across the country, Connolly made a special request. He wanted to return home to Boston. His mission? Take down the Italian mafia. The Patriarca crime family controlled organized crime across New England. They ran gambling operations, loan sharking rings, and protection rackets. They seemed untouchable. By 1975, Whitey Bulger had transformed himself. Released from prison years earlier, he climbed through the ranks of the Winter Hill Gang, an Irish criminal organization operating in Boston's shadows. Bulger was disciplined, ruthless, patient. That fall, in a quiet parking lot near the harbor, John Connolly arranged a meeting with his childhood hero. The FBI agent made his pitch. The Italian mafia was feeding information to the FBI about Bulger's crew. If Whitey wanted to survive, he needed to act first. He needed to become an informant. Bulger listened carefully. He gave no answer. He simply walked away. Days passed. Then one of Bulger's men was gunned down, killed by soldiers from the Italian mob. Connolly's phone rang. Whitey was in. On September 30th, 1975, the name James Whitey Bulger entered FBI files as a top echelon informant, a title reserved for the Bureau's most valuable sources. The FBI believed they had recruited a criminal asset. They were wrong. Whitey Bulger had recruited them. The arrangement seemed perfect at first. Bulger fed Connolly information about the Italian mafia, their gambling dens, loan sharking operations, and key players. Each piece of intelligence helped the FBI build cases against the Patriarca crime family. Headlines celebrated massive arrests. The Bureau was winning the war on organized crime. For John Connolly, these victories meant everything. His reputation soared. Supervisors praised his work. Internal memos described Bulger as one of the most highly placed and valuable informants in the Boston area. Connolly became a star. His supervisor, John Morris, earned promotions too. The entire operation looked like a triumph of law enforcement. But something sinister was growing beneath the surface. Every time the FBI weakened the Italian mafia, the Winter Hill Gang expanded. Bulger absorbed gambling operations. He took over loan sharking territories. He collected protection payments from businesses across Boston. His empire grew larger with each arrest his information helped secure. The valuable informant was using the FBI as a weapon against his competitors, and Connolly was helping him do it. In 1982, Agent Connolly hosted an unusual dinner party at his home. The guest list would have shocked any law enforcement professional. Sitting at the table together were Connolly, his supervisor John Morris, Whitey Bulger, and Bulger's partner Stephen the Rifleman Flemmy. FBI agents breaking bread with violent criminals. The relationship had evolved. These men were bound together now. Their careers, their reputations, and their secrets all tangled in a dangerous web. Cash began flowing in both directions. Connolly accepted payments from Bulger, amounts that would eventually total over $200,000. Morris took money too. They justified it to themselves in various ways. Fear, greed, the belief that they were still serving the greater good. Meanwhile, Whitey Bulger was killing people. Deborah Davis was only 26 years old. She was dating Stephen Flemmy, Bulger's partner. One day, Flemmy made a fatal mistake. He told her that he and Bulger were FBI informants. This was dangerous knowledge. Knowledge that people died for. One evening, Flemmy brought Deborah to a house in South Boston. She walked through the door expecting a quiet evening. Instead, Bulger grabbed her from behind. His arm locked around her throat. Flemmy stood and watched as Bulger strangled the young woman. They buried her body near the Neponset River. It would remain hidden for nearly 2 decades. This was the real Whitey Bulger. Behind the image of neighborhood protector stood a calculating killer who felt nothing for his victims. Psychologists would later describe him as a textbook sociopath, someone entirely lacking empathy, yet brilliantly skilled at manipulating others. Bulger understood exactly which buttons to push. Connolly's admiration for the Bulger family was obvious. The agent's craving for career advancement was even clearer. Both desires became instruments in Bulger's hands. And while Bulger presented himself as the man keeping drugs out of South Boston, court records would eventually reveal the truth. He controlled a massive drug operation, taking a cut from every dealer in his territory. He simply fed the FBI information about rival traffickers, eliminating competition while filling his own pockets. The perfect criminal enterprise, protected by the very people sworn to stop it. Other law enforcement agencies started noticing something strange. Massachusetts State Police would set up surveillance operations on Bulger's crew. Somehow, the targets always knew. DEA investigations mysteriously fell apart. Wiretaps were discovered. Witnesses disappeared or changed their stories. Whitey Bulger always seemed one step ahead. Investigators outside the FBI began whispering a terrifying theory. Someone inside the Bureau was protecting him. They had no idea how deep the corruption actually ran. Brian Halloran was scared. The low-level criminal had made a decision that would cost him his life. In early May 1982, he approached federal agents with explosive information. He claimed he could tie Whitey Bulger directly to the murder of a prominent Oklahoma businessman named Roger Wheeler. For the FBI, this could have been a breakthrough. Evidence linking their informant to a homicide. Halloran begged for protection. The man understood exactly what happened to people who betrayed Bulger. Request after request was filed. Desperate pleas reached the agents. The FBI ignored every single one. Instead, John Connolly delivered the information straight to Whitey Bulger. Weeks later, Brian Halloran and Michael Donahue sat in a sky-blue Datsun outside a Boston waterfront restaurant. Donahue was simply giving his coworker a ride home. He had 3 children waiting for him. He had no connection to organized crime. Bullets tore through the car. Donahue died instantly. Halloran stumbled out of the vehicle, wounded but alive. More shots echoed across the harbor. He collapsed on the pavement. The message was clear. Talk to the FBI about Whitey Bulger, and you die. Even innocent bystanders get caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, Connolly continued falsifying reports. He filled Bulger's FBI file with intelligence that actually came from other informants. He made Bulger appear more valuable than he actually was, all to justify continued protection of his childhood hero. The bodies kept piling up. John Callahan, a Boston businessman with ties to the Winter Hill Gang, became another target. When his name surfaced in connection with the Roger Wheeler murder investigation, Bulger ordered his elimination. Callahan was found dead in the trunk of a car at Miami International Airport. Years later, evidence would prove that John Connolly leaked Callahan's identity to Bulger, knowing full well what would happen. An FBI agent, complicit in murder. Cracks began appearing in the wall of protection surrounding Whitey Bulger. The fortress that had kept him safe for so long was starting to crumble. A team of investigative reporters at the Boston Globe started asking uncomfortable questions. Their Spotlight unit, famous for exposing institutional corruption in the city, turned its full attention to Boston's organized crime scene. These journalists dug deep. They interviewed sources. They pulled court records. They connected dots that law enforcement had ignored for years. One question kept surfacing. Why did Whitey Bulger seem immune to prosecution? Why did every single investigation targeting him mysteriously fall apart at the last moment? Their reporting hinted at connections between Bulger and the FBI that went far beyond a typical informant relationship. Something darker was happening inside the Bureau. Inside the FBI, changes were happening too. In 1990, a new special agent in charge arrived at the Boston FBI office. This man was different. Unlike his predecessors, he had no ties to the old guard. He carried no loyalty to the agents who had built their careers on Bulger's information. He walked into that office with fresh eyes and started asking questions that made people nervous. Why was this particular informant seemingly untouchable? Why did his name keep appearing in investigations that went nowhere? The pressure mounted from all directions. John Morris was crumbling under the weight of his secrets. The guilt consumed him slowly, eating away at whatever remained of his conscience. Fear of exposure kept him awake through long, dark nights. He understood exactly what he had done. He knew the whole operation was built on lies and blood. Every dollar he accepted, every name he leaked, every murder that followed, it all sat heavy on his shoulders. In April 1995, Morris made a decision that would bring everything crashing down. He walked into a room filled with federal prosecutors and confessed everything. He admitted accepting bribes from Bulger, cash payments that corrupted his badge. He confirmed helping protect the gangster from investigations that should have put him behind bars decades ago. Most damning of all, he acknowledged the FBI's direct role in multiple murders, enabled by agents who leaked the names of witnesses and informants to the very criminals they were supposed to be pursuing. With Morris cooperating fully, prosecutors finally had what they needed to move forward. They prepared indictments against Bulger, Flemmi, and several of their associates. The charges were devastating: extortion, racketeering, and involvement in 19 murders. Everything John Connolly had built over 2 decades was collapsing around him. But he had one final act of betrayal left to commit. According to testimony that would emerge years later, Connolly learned about the sealed indictment before it was executed. He discovered that agents were coming for Bulger. On December 23, 1994, just 2 days before Christmas, he picked up the phone and called Whitey Bulger one last time. Hours before agents arrived to arrest him, Bulger vanished into thin air. He took his girlfriend, Catherine Greig, and disappeared into the night. His apartment was left empty, valuables and cash already gone. Bulger had been preparing for this moment for years, always knowing this day might come. Multiple false identities sat ready in safe deposit boxes. Hidden bank accounts held enough money to last decades. Escape routes were planned down to the smallest detail. By January 1995, James Whitey Bulger was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The very agency that protected him for 20 years was now hunting him. Stephen Flemmi had less luck. He was captured almost immediately. In a desperate legal move, his defense attorneys made a stunning claim in open court. Flemmi and Bulger had been granted immunity by the FBI for their crimes in exchange for information. This official court filing blew the scandal wide open for the entire world to see. Congress held public hearings demanding answers. Internal investigations were launched at every level. The Boston FBI office underwent a complete overhaul from top to bottom. John Connolly faced the justice system he once represented. In December 1999, he was indicted on racketeering, obstruction of justice, and making false statements to investigators. His trial exposed the full extent of the corruption. Cozy dinners with mobsters, cash payments delivered in brown envelopes, witnesses who died after their identities were leaked. In 2002, Connolly was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. But his troubles were only beginning. The search for Whitey Bulger became one of the largest manhunts in FBI history. The Bureau dedicated massive resources to tracking down their former informant, the same man they had protected for decades. Reported sightings came from London, Sicily, Uruguay, and dozens of other locations across the globe. Agents followed thousands of tips, chasing shadows from one country to another. Television programs featured his photograph week after week. Crime shows broadcast his face into millions of living rooms. Yet Bulger remained invisible, a ghost moving through the world without leaving a trace. The truth was far less exotic than anyone imagined. While investigators searched across continents, spending millions of dollars and countless hours, Whitey Bulger and Catherine Greig were living quietly in a modest apartment in Santa Monica, California. They rented a simple unit in a beachside building. They called themselves Charles and Carol Gasco. To their neighbors, they were simply a retired elderly couple who kept to themselves. They paid rent on time. They smiled politely in hallways. They blended into the California sunshine like any other retirees enjoying their golden years. For 16 years, one of America's most wanted criminals lived in plain sight, walking those streets, breathing the same air as ordinary citizens who had no idea a killer lived among them. The families of Bulger's victims carried a different burden during those years. They never stopped fighting. Michael Donahue's children grew up without their father. They graduated school. They started careers. They married and started families of their own, all while seeking justice for a man who was taken from them on that Boston waterfront. The Davis family endured their own painful wait. 19 long years before Deborah's remains were finally discovered and returned to them. 19 years of wondering. 19 years of grief without closure. In 2009, a federal judge ruled that the FBI bore responsibility for the deaths of Halloran and Donahue. The court examined the evidence and reached a damning conclusion. FBI corruption had directly enabled the murders. The agency that was supposed to protect citizens had instead protected their killer. Both families were initially awarded millions in damages. Finally, it seemed, some measure of justice. But appeals courts later overturned the award on a technicality. The system failed them once again. John Connolly's punishment continued to mount behind bars. In 2008, he faced additional charges. He was convicted of second-degree murder for his role in John Callahan's death, the businessman whose identity he had leaked to Bulger, knowing full well what would happen. The former star agent, once celebrated for taking down the Italian mafia, received a 40-year sentence, effectively life imprisonment for the aging former agent. He would spend his final years in the very prison system he once helped fill. By 2011, the FBI doubled the reward for Bulger's capture to $2 million. Desperation was setting in. They shifted strategy, focusing on Catherine Greig instead of Bulger himself. She was the weak link. Public service announcements targeted places where women her age might visit: beauty salons, dental offices, medical clinics. They knew she would need to maintain her appearance and health care. On June 22, 2011, the 16-year manhunt finally ended. A former neighbor from Santa Monica was watching television. News coverage about Catherine Greig flashed across her screen. Something clicked. She recognized her as the elderly Carol Gasco she had known from the apartment building, the quiet woman who always seemed pleasant. She picked up the phone and called the tip line. Agents moved quickly. They lured Bulger to the building's garage with a simple story about a break-in to his storage locker. The old gangster took the bait. When he emerged from his apartment to check on his belongings, they were waiting. The most wanted man in America, once the FBI's protected informant, was finally in custody. Handcuffs clicked around the wrists that had strangled Deborah Davis, the same hands that had ordered dozens of deaths. His trial in 2013 captivated the nation. Victims' families packed the courtroom every single day, finally facing the man who had destroyed their lives. Mothers who lost sons, children who lost fathers. They sat in those wooden benches and stared at the elderly man in the defendant's chair. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of his crimes: the murders, the drug trafficking, the extortion rackets. Witness after witness painted a picture of pure evil. On August 12, 2013, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty on 31 of 32 counts, including involvement in 11 murders. The judge handed down the maximum punishment: 2 consecutive life sentences plus 5 years. James Whitey Bulger would die in prison.